All right. Let's get this going. Let's get this going. Let's get this going. All right. We are here, yo. We are here at the first ever revolutionary educator panel, access and equity, a discussion around breaking through the standard. It's amazing to be here. If you are new and you are new to my platform and you are new to coming into knowing who I am, I'm gonna introduce myself. I'm Principal Rahh. I'm known as the revolutionary principal. All right, I specialize in revolutionizing school cultures. That is specifically what I do. I am born and raised from Compton. That you can see on the hat. Represent that proud. I represent that with the honor. You know, I got my boy Makai here, president. He's gonna talk a little bit more about that. But I'm a founding principal out here. I founded my own high school out here in South Central Los Angeles, which has grown to be a restorative community and a model school to show how schools should model restorative practices, and we're proud of that. Now we have come together off of like people across the nation to talk about this equity, to talk about what is needed to unlock the hidden treasure in young people and teachers. So we're super excited for this dynamic panel. We're gonna go through and introduce them because they're all phenomenal in their own right. I know them each personally. So first I wanna introduce the wonderful, the honorable Tanya Franklin, who I've known for so long. Introduce yourself, Tanya, and just let the world know what you're all about.
Good morning. The honorable is maybe coming. I'm the board member elect for LA Unified Board District 7, which is where Rah's school is. It covers South LA, Watts, Gardena, Wilmington, Carson, down to San Pedro here in LA. I technically get sworn in on December 15th, but I've been working for the last 15 years in educational equity in LA, first as a classroom teacher, and most recently with the Partnership for LA Schools, focused on restorative cultures and communities. So glad to be here with you all this morning.
Oh yeah, she's a rock star. I'm telling you, I'm excited for the work that she's about to do. Really. Next, man, we got the honorable man. Listen, this guy's seen me. He's seen me grow up from a snotty nosed kid thinking I was gonna make it to the NBA and the football at Compton College to you know finding my own lane. Brother Makai, go ahead and introduce yourself. Oh, you muted. You muted, I think. Or we can't hear you. Look at him. He trying to rock start already. I still can't hear you, King. I still can't hear you. We gonna move next. We got the honorable Jeff Garrett. I mean, leadership extraordinaire, developer of leaders. Go ahead and introduce yourself, King.
All right, good morning, everybody. Very excited to be here today. I'm Jeffrey Garrett. I am the Senior Director of Leadership Development for the Partnership for LA Schools, which is a network of 19 schools that are part of Los Angeles Unified, specifically serving the communities of Boyle Heights, Watts, and South LA. And previously, in my former life, I lived in New York and I was a principal in the South Bronx. And yeah, man, excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Oh yeah, man, absolutely. Next, we have a revolutionary principal in our own right. The person that gave me my shot. Listen, y'all, I was an assistant. I was an aspiring assistant principal, and LAUSD shut down due to a bomb threat. And I met this principal, and she's like, "Hey, I need somebody to do this restorative practices stuff." And you know, she took a shot on this guy. So go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Gonzalez. I'm a principal in South Los Angeles at Diego Rivera High School, the School of Communication and Technology. And we are a pilot school, which means that we are teacher-led. And so although I'm the principal and I provide guidance and direction, we really include the voices of our staff and our teachers in all of our decision-making, including our students and our family. So that's like a big priority for us. And of course, I had met Rahh doing restorative practices training. And then we bumped into each other one day and I was like, I need someone to help. My school's predominantly male, about 70%. And I'm like, I need like a strong male figure to come and really like help with the school culture because there was still some work we needed to do. I went to my team and I said, we need to bring him on board. We got to figure it out. Even if it was a semester, that was the deal we made, just to get his foot in the door into that AP world. And then look at him now. Like, he came in, he did so much for our school, and then he got hired as a principal ASAP. But we were all really happy for him.
Oh, thanks. And then, man, we got this young revolutionary teacher right here. Listen, I've been trying to get him to my school for almost 2 years. He keeps dodging me, and he keeps dodging me. He's, man, this math teacher right here, man, Victor Lee, man, he's done so much work in Watts. Go ahead and introduce yourself, King.
What's going on, everybody? I am happy to be here. My name is Victor Lee. Like Principal Rahh said, I've spent 4 years working in the community of Watts, and like two people who approach this work in such a humanizing way. We're bound to meet up at some point, so that's how our paths cross. But yeah, I moved back home. I'm now in Pomona, where I grew up, and I'm working at the School of Arts and Enterprise, independent charter school. And yeah, super happy to be here and to really participate in this conversation on access and equity, because I live and I breathe this stuff.
Absolutely. Man, the queen, I call her the queen of restorative practices. We met on social media. She's just revolutionizing schools, that leaders and KIPs across the country. Man, go ahead, Claudine, go ahead and introduce yourself and the work that you do.
Thank you, Rahh, for that gracious introduction. For those that don't know me, my name is Claudine Miles. I come by the way of education, started as like a 6th grade science teacher, and then was an assistant principal in the West End of Atlanta. If you know anything about Atlanta at all, there's this lovely documentary called The Bluff. That's where I taught, and that was the only place I taught. I love my community, I love my parents, I love my kids, and so in 2018, I was like, I want to figure out how to build a bigger, broader impact, because we were doing restorative practices at the school, seeing drastic turnaround, and I was like, how do we bring this to other kids? Not just in Atlanta, but like nationally. And so I launched Restore More, and my business partner and I have been running ever since, leading and training educators, parents, and nonprofit organizational staff on how to better parent, how to better lead children, how trauma impacts learning, and using restorative practices to do these trainings so that it doesn't feel like a training, but you're actually circling, talk about your own trauma, and then in turn, understanding what you're gonna have to better do for kids as a result. And so, as Rahh said, through the grace of the good Lord, my curriculum is now in 27 states. We have 42 partner organizations. We just won a recent Shark Tank. So things have been moving for us, because suddenly people are like, oh, the social emotional health of children during a pandemic is important. I'm like, oh, it was important before, but we'll capitalize off the opportunity in the moment. So thank you for that introduction.
Absolutely. And then I got to introduce this king right here, man. This, the rapper, the entrepreneur, the edupreneur, the person that when he speaks to your soul. And that is Brother Chivy. Go ahead, King. Introduce yourself and the work that you do.
Oh, man. See, Rahh, we just had you feeling like you done more than you did, But, yo, my name is Chivy Brooks. I'm a high school educator, teach economics and government in Atlanta, Georgia. I work in Clayton County Public Schools, the Honorable Charles Drew High School. I'm a former Freestyle Friday Hall of Famer back in the free and AJ BET times. Also have done work as a legislative aide at the Capitol here, done work in mental health here, and then transitioned into education. I'm one of those people that ran from being a teacher my entire life and eventually had to answer the calling. And so now we do work here in Atlanta, around social justice, around economic freedom for young people. Man, it's an honor to be here. So thank you.
Absolutely. Brother Makai, did we get that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you are good.
All right, it's a pleasure and a privilege to represent the Compton Unified School District. I've been the president, longest serving president in the history of the Unified School District, and I'm very, very grateful again to be here today. Just very specific to the point, I know our time is very limited.
I frequently discuss the idea of embracing and incorporating the value of equity in all that we do. And I'm very grateful within the Compton school system, we've done exactly that with the establishment of the Office of Black Student Excellence, specifically to deal with the challenges associated with Black students. And also, I want to congratulate and commend our brother Rahh for a phenomenal job he did at the CAPC conference a few weeks past. And so for many of you who are not familiar, it's the California Association of Black School Educators, which I founded in 2016 with an approach to how we bring together thought leaders from the charter, community college, and traditional school system space to really talk about equity-centric instructional best practices that enhance the quality of learning for Black students. So again, thank you, and I look forward to delving into the discussion greatly with you folks here today.
All right, listen, everybody. It's time. All that good stuff is out the door now. All right, it's time to dive into some real work around talking with our young people and around talking about our teachers and our principals and our parents and our communities. So let's jump into the question, because the people want to know, I want to know, the community want to know, and we're gonna start off with you, Tanya, and everyone else. Feel free when like I said, when the spirit hits you, you speak into your authentic self. All right, all the tagline. We want you and your philosophy and what you believe in. This is what this platform is about. So Tanya, let's first, we talk about equity all the time, and I know myself as a leader, people throw out equity, and as you start to have dialogue around equity, you start to really figure out that some people really don't know what it means, right? And I think like having this operational definition is really important. So as a board member and as I would say a fighter for equity, how do we define equity? Like, what is the definition? What is our definition of equity? Go ahead.
Thanks for the question, and I absolutely invite others to weigh in as well. In public education, we confuse equality and equity all the time, right? We think we have to give everyone the same so that they have the same opportunity, but that has been not what happens in the past. And so given that kids haven't gotten the same in the past, equity actually, in my opinion, and I think a lot of folks here might back this up, it's about differentiating and resourcing based on need. And so you recognize first and foremost the wrongs of the past, acknowledge that for the last 400 years, our country has kept down particular communities, and we name that, right? Those that have been most historically at the margins, our Black students, Latinx, low income, right? We name for whom we are centering this idea of equity and flipping how we think about giving dollars and power with decisions to the communities that have been most historically neglected. And so when I think about equity, I think of it as two parts: recognize the wrongs of the past and take action to correct that going forward. So often people want to talk about it and think about it and theorize on it, but we need to see dollars, we need to see policies, we need to see programs and people really supporting those that have not been historically supported. But I welcome other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed something to me when we talk about dollars, right? And we're talking about money, and we're talking about the transactions. And I want to bring, and I want to invite Jeff, talking about equity, and we're talking about money, and in your role talking about equity, how do you align, and I want Makai, you to jump in too, align money with measurable goals around equity and inclusion? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I would say I'm really glad that Tanya defined equity the way she did, because really at the core of it, to me, it's about resources. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's of course, it's about other things as well, right? And recognition and representation and those sorts of things, which are important. But the part of it we get most stuck on, the part of it that people fight back against the hardest, is about distribution of resources. And that's the part we've done the poorest with throughout our entire history up to this very moment in time that we are speaking. So, so to your question, I think that, you know, I think what we have to do is really move resources, right? So, and one example of this is, you know, the organization I work for, Partnership for LA Schools, philanthropically funded organization, right? So we bring extra resources to the table to support schools that have historically underserved their communities for, you know, the longest time, right? And so that's a good thing, but fundamentally an organization like the Partnership shouldn't have to exist, right? We should have policies, funding streams, and structures in place that says, you know, what is needed where we've had historical oppression is not only, you know, a little bit more Title I dollars or a little bit more Title III dollars, but actually is multiples of the, of slices of the kind of equally distributed pie in order to actually rectify the damage that has been done and that continues to be done by factors outside of school. So, you know, we're moving in a good direction, but we're taking, you know, small steps right now. Some big steps to come. I look forward to.
Gotcha.
You know, so let me kind of be the wet blanket at the picnic here. So I think a lot of times there's too much talk about equity and there's too much talk, period. And so I think what people are looking for, strike that, I know what people are looking for is action. We have far too many taglines, far too many bumper stickers, far too many monikers and slogans. And people really want to see action, which is why the Compton Unified School District led the fight to abolish the ACT as well as the SAT as a means and measure for college admissions. We sued the University of California system over the use of such a test. And the fact is that these tests were exclusionary, favoring students with more resources.
You said they were racist.
Well, we can go there, but the fact of the matter is this. Here's the deal. Black children are underachieving across California, and we're talking. We're talking, and we're having all these phenomenal discussions, and at the very end of the day, Black children are still underachieving. So people are looking for you to be a verb and not a noun. And I think oftentimes we don't call out Black children. We're calling out every other child and on every other issue, every other bandwagon, but not dealing with the reality that we sit in position, and it's cool to blame the other guy. It's fine to blame him. But also let's look introspective and let's look reflectively at ourselves and the positions that we have and exactly what we're doing in order to move the needle for Black children.
And
that's what I'm about.
I want to move this too, Chevy, because I think Chevy, we talked about this, and I think it's really important too as we talk about this standardized testing in regards of equity. Is equity like a buffer word for a system that is racist, right?
Yeah, and that's what
go ahead, Chevy.
Yeah, no, because I think, first off, we got to stop using the word equity. I'm sorry, we got to stop using the word equity and the word equality, right? Yep. Because that's the issue right there. See, when we use the word equity and equality, we are then literally being complicit in white supremacy. Let me explain. Our goal should not be overcoming barriers. Our goal should be dismantling barriers. What we should be talking about is freedom and liberation. Stop talking about equity. Equity means we are allowing the systems that stop us from getting to where we need to go to exist. We're allowing them to stand. We're working around them. We're getting over them. We're getting through them. We're going beneath them, but we are not dismantling them. We got to stop talking about how do we get our kids to achieve better on these tests and abolish the test. Stop letting these things stand by using language that allows them to exist. This is frustrating for me. Because now I have watched more than 3-4 generations of my family, my great-grandfather being a pastor, my grandfather being a pastor, my father being a Panther. Now, we 4 generations deep in this thing, and I'm still fighting the same fight that my family been fighting. This is a problem.
Absolutely.
Because we keep trying to work around systems that exist instead of breaking them, dismantling them, and building them so that they keep and regard our babies in favor. Stop allowing these systems to exist and start dismantling these systems.
Absolutely. And I think now when you're talking about dismantle, it's like that. It seems like we have to be always palatable for a system that has oppressed, right? And I want to bring you in, Victor, and then Claudine and Dr. Gonzalez as a principal, but as a teacher, how does this trickle down to you, Victor, in your classroom, right? Like this language of equity, this language of dismantle, this language of how do you say, forget overcoming a barrier, right? Forget trying to overcome, let's dismantle this sucker. What does that look like during this time for you as a teacher?
Yeah, definitely. So with years of racist policies like redlining, like it pushed Black and brown people into these areas of high concentrations of poverty and violence. And I think it would be just irresponsible if we believe like that stuff that's happening in their community did not trickle into the classroom, right? And then go about it as business as usual. Like I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, I can't learn about the Pythagorean theorem right now because that's not going to help me eat tonight. Or yo, Mr. Lee, it's hard for me to focus today because I saw daddy get drunk and beat on mommy, and that just keeps replaying over in my head, right? Like it'll be irresponsible for me as an educator to pretend like these things are not happening in our students' communities, right? And it just blows my mind how we spend so much time focusing on grades and test scores and behavior referrals when those are just the symptoms of the issue, right? Those are just the symptoms. Like we spend so little time taking a deep dive into like the root cause of these issues, right? And that's considering needs. And when I think equity, I think needs. And our students have different needs. Our teachers have different needs. And so many times we just like to throw these blanketed policies to govern everything and dictate how I approach my pedagogy and not considering that we all just have different needs, right? And how does that manifest in the classroom? Like I said earlier, for my students, it's inability to focus, erratic behavior, inability to, their short-term memories impacted. So so when I think equity, I think of addressing their needs, not just in the classroom, right? Which in education, we like to just focus right there, but what's happening in the community as a whole.
Gotcha. Claudine, go ahead.
Tap in,
Yeah.
because I think Shivy and you touched on it, like this concept of palatable words. What are the words that make people, educators and parents feel safe? And I think if we keep dancing around the truth of the matter, we never get to the root issue, right? So as Shivy said, 30, 40 years later, we're still seeing inequitable schools in our neighborhoods. So I have a major challenge with that word equity because I'm like, we're oppressing communities. We're oppressing Black and brown kids. One definition of the word oppressed is to keep subservient. We are keeping entire demographics subservient in this capitalistic machine because we are not giving them the tools to succeed. And when you go to more affluent schools, schools with resources, schools that are more equitable and real talk, just less oppressed, and don't have Black and brown bodies that people feel they need to control, they're given access to the right skills. They've got STEM training. They've got entrepreneur club. They've got job shadowing opportunities. We need those same things in our schools so that our children can stop being oppressed. So again, we can use the word equity, but I think especially in 2020, we've gotten away from calling things what they are. And I'm a realist. I'm gonna call it a spade. If it's racist, it's racist. If it's oppressive, it's oppressive. And after looking at 40 years of history and saying nothing has changed in certain neighborhoods, there's nothing else to call it other than oppressive. Equity's too nice. Equity's too patient. Equity means we still got time to talk about it. When I see 4 generations of family in poverty, I'm the first generation in my family to break the cycle. You hear me? My brother is serving a sentence now. My father struggled with drugs my entire life. I am the first. That's a problem. And there are kids right now who will be the first graduate in Black and brown communities, but we're labeling it equity. We're being nice about it. We're tiptoeing about it. And I'm not here to be respectable or nice. I'm here to advocate for my kids.
Absolutely. And I think the time is now, right? I think this urgency, like I tell people all the time, like we can't, either you work well in an inequitable system and you try to work, or you try to change the fact that it's an inequitable system. And I want to bring Dr. Gonzalez in because a lot of your work is around equity and around fighting for access and fighting for this. So talk to us a little bit about like, what does that look at the principal seat, right? And I don't want to get away from what Makai said in this standardized test and ACT and the fight that is going on, not just California, but nationally, that we have to look at from a principle. How are we standardizing unstandardized conditions for young people? So I think it's really important for you, Dr. Gonzalez, to go ahead and speak on that.
No, I mean, I think as a principal, you're in a bind because you are employed by a system that feeds into all of this, right? And so if you start trying to push against that, like, what does that mean, right? To go against that. And so you're trying to be conscientious and like do what you can at your school, knowing that I'm still having conversations with my teachers about, all right, you can only fail students if you've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things, because we can't say, you know, no fails, but also we can't say like pass everybody, like we can't have those conversations. So now I'm going through this extensive process. So that's like at the small scale level. I think the larger level for me as a principal has always been that we can expect, when you read about successful schools, 1 out of every 100 successful in a low income community, and now that becomes the model. I'm against that being the model. Like, why are we looking at the one-off to try to say that everyone else can do that when the systems aren't set up for more schools to be successful? Like, it's easy for one principal to have the hookup, the right relationship, get the teacher they need, do the workaround against the policy, against the contract to get what they need. It's harder for it to be systemic across the board. And I feel like when we talk about issues of equity, we really have to look at systemic things within the infrastructure of schools. And I think too easily, and what everyone's mentioned about using the word equity is that people tinker with change. Well, what can we add a little salt right here to like make people happy? Let me change what I call this position to the trend name. Although what they're doing is exactly the same thing. Nothing has shifted. Let's like move the pieces of the puzzle, relabel it, and protect this larger system. And so then let's go out with that. And then for me, it's always been, how does the larger community, how are they being held to account? Our other elected officials, which is why I ran for office, because schools get measured. There are accountability pieces that we have all this pressure to fulfill. But like Victor mentioned, the kids are coming in with us in ways that they have such high needs that teachers have to spend a bulk of their time away from instruction to deal with social emotional. That reduces instructional time. So it's like, how do we take that into account in different communities? I have so much to say, including from budgets. Money's not everything. If there's systems that are inequitable, I've had money and I can't hire the teachers that I need, you know? So it's kind of like, and then the money's restricted to like certain items, and it's like, well, that's not what my families need. My families need food right now. They need me to be able to give this grant and gift cards. Well, you can't. You can only buy these 5 things. Well, now it's just a waste of money because I can't really use it for what I need it. And then also I think about how we train our staff to tolerate the inequities and the injustices. So let's train everyone to be trauma informed. Why aren't we dealing with the fact that kids are coming in with trauma? Like, who takes on that responsibility and how do we build those bridges? So to me, like as a principal, I've tried to expand and push out of my school to really talk to different elected officials and everyone else to start saying, we got to start looking at the communities our schools are in and start pushing there too, because we can't do it with just our schools alone. We've been carrying the burden of like dramatic increases in wealth gaps, divestment. And I'm going to post an article because one of the things that I try to do is as much as possible get these issues out into the public sphere. So Cal Matters just wrote an article about our school, and they really researched broadband access in South LA and the fact that they intentionally left building of towers and access out. So when our students say our internet doesn't work even with Wi-Fi hotspots, it's not just them. The building of the infrastructure was actually intentional about leaving certain communities out. And now our kids are failing this entire year because of that. So where are our legislators? How do we push on them to start addressing some of these larger issues?
And I think this version of how, right? This version of how, and I want to jump back in because I think this how is a recent study from Harvard Politics talked about this accountability system, right, around standardized testing, and talked about, is this a civil rights issue, right? And I want to bring this back because it's like we're fighting against a system that is designed to fight harder than us, right? And I want to bring this on a national, because what you highlight, Dr. Gonzalez, is this is something that's just in LA, but this is happening in Atlanta. This is happening in New Jersey. This is happening in New York. This is happening in Texas. This is happening all across the nation, right? So this accountability system, I want to bring in as a new board member in a small area, but nationally, Tanya, how do we, because this notion of how is really important. Like, I don't want us to just talk about it, but like, what are the next steps that are actionable where we're talking about how do we change and dismantle a system that has historically, like, let's be real, founded, like the testing, you talked about it, Makai, the testing is racist, right? The norm reference test has been racist. So how do we go forward with moving towards a better accountability system? I want to go with Tanya, Makai, and then Alfred. Go ahead.
I want to build on what Dr. Gonzalez said about running for office, because I, have complained about the system for the last 15 years, and now I get the awesome responsibility to be a part of shifting that. And you need allies in the system working alongside community that have been pushing on the system. And so I think, particularly in, governmental institutions, but also business and philanthropy and people who donate to elected officials, right? We are accountable to our voters and our kids first and foremost. And yet elected officials can be clouded by so much of the politicking that decenters our kids and that allows us to perpetuate racism and systems of power. And so we need people who have the deep, deep integrity to be in these leadership positions. And it is hard. It is not harder than teaching, in my opinion. I mean, I haven't led yet, but running a campaign, in my opinion, was not as hard as being a classroom teacher. So shout out to all the educators on this Zoom. But to the extent folks are willing, I think labor leadership is huge, right? Represent at your school, represent in your region if you can, and really take these core ideas to the table where the decisions are happening. And don't allow ourselves to be clouded by all of the money and the power and the what am I going to do next as an individual, as opposed to maintaining this collective action that absolutely needs to drive the leadership at the top. And I mean the top at all levels. So that's one thing I would offer.
Nice. Makai, go ahead.
And let me just kind of slide back to what Ms. Miles was stating earlier. Let me offer this. Oftentimes the oppressed oppress greater. And I think we ought to kind of shift the mental paradigm, if you will, the thought process associated with some boogeyman or some mythical God who has his hand over us and he's disallowing us to achieve, when many of us are running, managing, leading, and guiding the systems that continuously produce substandard outcomes for Black children. I'm going back to that because I'm referencing the CASP data in California, which is abysmal. And until recently, could anybody ever say Black children without having to preface it by either children of color or adding a comma on the end, children of color? So the fact of the matter is this. The blame game is cool. We know how the system has been designed, but it's up to us to understand how to utilize mechanisms, measures, and means in order to channel the water accordingly to help to allow our children to flow through the system. The fact of the matter is we've had an opportunity with CAPSI to build a blueprint, crowdsourced document, multi-iterative living document, which allows short, middle, and long-term best practices, strategies, and targeted interventions, showing the greatest potential for improving outcomes for Black children. Let's talk about some of those. Embracing technology, early middle colleges, concurrent dual enrollment, dual immersion. We talk about bias, we talk about inherent racism. That's great. We know that exists. We get that. But what about looking at holistic cradle to career opportunities and engagements, district-wide, system-wide, et cetera, that allows for students to have access to educational support? We have it right before us. Let us utilize opportunities like early middle college, AB 288, concurrent dual enrollment. Let us see that as an opportunity, as a motivating factor to move students forward. It's cool to call it what it is. It's cool to identify it. We got it. We've identified it long enough. Let's move our children along, because guess what? They're going to be left behind. We are living in a global society that in many instances, they do not recognize race as we see it in this country. Because guess what? We look at poverty as a state of mind in the US, but it's a way of life for many around the world, and they're utilizing everything I'm articulating in order to get ahead of our students. Why would you need to bring in farm workers if in fact you had an educational system that produced that? So here we have an opportunity. Blame game is cool. We know it. We got it. Trump is gone. What now? If Black children can't achieve in the next 4 years, then what are we going to say?
Thank you for adding that point, but I would like to speak back. My intent was not to do a blame game, but to call out the systemic racism that exists. And while we may be clear on that, it's evident that not everyone is clear on that by the voting numbers. So I think we have to be just mindful that the curse of knowledge is real. So the knowledge that some of us hold, even some of the people on this call hold, is not indicative of what every individual in this country holds. And I agree with you. While it's important to call out the systemic racism, we still have a responsibility to uplift our own, which is why I've spent 10 years in Black and brown communities, uplifting our kids, making sure they get to college or find post-secondary careers that are successful. And I've seen literally generational curses be broken through good quality teaching, by social emotional support, through restorative practices, through all of the things you're talking about. I was at a Title I charter school. We had one-to-one computers. We had all these wonderful wraparound services that supported our kids. So yes, there are things that work, but I think if we're having a conversation about equity, then it was really important for me to discuss the powers that be that do affect our work. Now, beyond that, yes, what do we need to do to still help our children find success? Because we live in this country and we can't escape those systems. But I think it's important for me to speak truth to power, and I don't want to be labeled as, oh, that's the blame game, because that doesn't come off in a way to me that is what I was trying to do. So I want to make sure that I take an opportunity to clarify my words and situate exactly my intentions so that they're not misinterpreted.
And I want to jump in. I think the fact is that many educators across the nation are going to fight. They're going to fight tooth and nail for the things that you said, Makai. But what if we defunded the money for standardized tests and allocated for resources to help that fight, right? Like, I want to bring in Shivy and Garrett and talk about, because Garrett, you talked a lot about on your platform, like this unstandardized test. And I know, Shivy, you talk about it, because I feel like now we're talking about money, resources. What are we measuring? Like literally, like what are we measuring? Can some like help me out? What are we measuring? And like everybody says, like this achievement gap and all. Can somebody help me out? Help me out. Anybody, tap in.
I'm gonna let the king go ahead and jump in, and I'm gonna follow up behind him.
Yeah. So I'll be transparent and say I am not someone who is holistically against standardized testing as a tool in education. And I think it's actually, we have just misused what standardized testing is and can be. And the reality is most of the good equity work that's happening across the country relies on standardized testing to hold states and districts accountable, to say like, hey, here's where you're failing and we're going to bring a lawsuit, or we're going to push politically for change to happen. So I don't think the answer is we just get rid of standardized testing, right? That's not actually going to solve the barrier. Like even here in California with the UCs and the CSUs, not using SAT or ACT, the reality is those are highly exclusive institutions. The UCs take the top 10% of the kids in the state every year, and that's what they're going to keep doing, whether they define it with the SAT or whether they define it with some other measure. So there's not a world where we eliminate standardized testing and now justice flows, like waters, right? Like that's not what's going to happen. I do think we radically misuse standardized testing, and we're holding the wrong people accountable for the results of standardized testing. I forget now who said it, but like, what if mayors were held accountable, or, or school board presidents were held accountable for standardized testing results, right? Instead of, 7th graders who can't go to 8th grade because of a test score. So I think, to me, I understand the focus on standardized testing. It's narrowing the curriculum. There are racist and classist implications of that we have to address. for sure. And I think sometimes we get stuck in a rut around issues of equity where we're trying to like innovate our way out of the problems we have. We don't need to innovate our way out of it. The things that our students need, the things that the communities that we serve we need are not unknown to us, right? Like people need stability, they need a home, they need food, they need healthcare, they need opportunity to be able to come to school in a place where survival is not the first thing that's on their mind in the morning and where learning can be the first thing that's on their mind. Then they need a school that doesn't have 37 kids in a classroom, right? Show me any fancy private academy in the United States that's got 37 kids in a classroom, and then we can talk about how class size doesn't matter, right? They need a rich curriculum that has arts, that has music, that has, you know, science and social studies and all the stuff that got squeezed out of the curriculum because of the No Child Left Behind era, right? Like this is not rocket science. This is not innovative thinking. This is what everyone knows that we should do. And we need resources to bring those things into reality. So, you know, I'm not opposed to other stuff that's been said here, but I think sometimes we get distracted in the shiny objects and lose sight of the fact that this is about resources that communities need in order to be able to move from survival to thriving.
I'm gonna tap in, Shivy, but before that, I want to push you too, because I think what you're talking about too are the implications of standardized testing, right? Because this has shrunk the opportunity for educators and principals to say, let's focus on the arts, let's focus on these things, because the accountability comes back on what is this standardized test for, especially at the secondary level, right? So if we're talking about adding more resources and focusing on, I always believe that if a district said that our mission is for every student to achieve self-actualization, then they will focus on the child before everything else. And then inherently, you will operate differently. Your actionable steps will be differently. You will move with a total different vision and mission versus having something that is aligned with let's be honest. There's so much money that's pushed on standardized tests. We say the wealth gap, and I have it right here. Harvard talked about the achievement gap and how it connects with the wealth gap, right? So if we're talking about the number one way for students to close the wealth gap for our communities is getting to college, what is the number one thing that's blocking them? Right? And I want to tap in Shivy. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm actually really glad that I didn't go ahead and speak before Garrett spoke, because the things that Garrett is talking about is essentially, you know, it's an echo of what Mr. McCog was saying, right? Like many times we can mean well, but the impact of our well-meaning is actually a continuum of the oppression that we're having to deal with, right? So when we're talking about allowing standardized testing to exist, Mr. Garrett, what we're doing is we're allowing the systematic oppression of our people to sustain, right? So first, we have to understand where standardized testing came from in the very first place. Standardized testing, it was a device used intentionally in the military in 1927 in order to keep Black officers from being able to reach a certain level. Those same individuals that created that test in the military, the alpha beta test, you can look it up and Google it, right? The alpha beta test ended up becoming the same architects of the SAT. So you gotta understand that these things were designed to be against us. So when we say, oh, I'm not against standardized testing, what we're saying is, I'm not against the oppression of our people, because that's what it was intended to do. Now, let's dig deeper. Our curriculum, which we all have a problem with, well, first of all, let me also say this. The problem is not just the test. Part of the problem is the test. See, we have a systematic, comprehensive problem that we have to deal with, and that is a facet of it, but it is a major chunk. It is a keystone in the barriers of opportunity for our babies. When we allow these standardized testing practices to stand, but also forget, what do we tell teachers? Differentiate your lesson. Why do we tell teachers differentiate their lessons? We tell them to differentiate their lessons because our students learn in different ways. Some are auditory learners, some are kinetic learners, some are verbal learners, we all learn in different ways, but yet we tell students you have to prove your comprehension in one way. That automatically divorces many of our babies from being able to get to where they need to get to. Now let's bring it back home. Most of these standardized tests are owned by 2 publishing companies, Pearson and McGraw. Those tests, these curriculum, the things that we perpetuate throughout the country, do you know where they're written? Do you know where they're decided? In Texas. In Texas. So when we talk about the issue with these tests, you got to understand that first off, their bread is getting buttered. We got to understand that somebody is writing these tests, but they have a colonialized mindset. They have an experience that they have that is true to their locality, but not true to where we are. Now, we have to be very careful about this one thing, because I think everybody keeps missing this. In the very beginning, I said to you all, we got to stop talking about equity. We got to talk about freedom and liberation. And what did everybody do? Ignore what I said and kept with the language of talking about equity. It's around our heads. It's the name of the event. It's the language out of our mouths, right? And what does that mean? By essence, we are still allowing these systems to exist. Why fight the system instead of dismantle the system? Why perpetuate systems that we know are designed against us instead of designing systems that are for us? Why do we continue to ignore what we know is wrong? Because it's what we're used to. It's what we've always done. We want to call ourselves revolutionary. We can't be revolutionary and complicit at the same time. You cannot have faith and have fear at the same time. They cannot coexist.
Powerful, powerful, right? So let's bring in Tanya, right? And then I want to go tap back into you and feel free, Victor, to jump in. When we're talking about all this in regards of accountability system, right? What's the next step?
I could tell other people are itching to jump in too, so I'll be quick. I think we have to be clear about what student learning looks like, sounds like, feels like in our schools. And currently we have standardized tests as one measure of student mastery of standards. And that's not a full picture of student learning as we know it needs to be for the future. And so part of what we need to do is redesign how we measure and set big goals, because right now we're pretty limited. We look at quantitative measures like attendance, like SBAC, like other standardized assessments. And yet I'd be curious if folks have found a really good way to be holistic and qualitative when talking about student achievement. And I mean holistic achievement, right? Health and wellness, social, emotional, students being social justice advocates and helping us lead to abolition in the future, because I think there needs to be a progressive journey. And I absolutely hear the voice of dismantle and eradicate and not perpetuating oppression any minute longer. And yet, the current system still exists. And for kids to be college graduates and to be leaders of the future, they still have to navigate the current situation. And so I wonder what the timeline looks like and how we can collectively move, advocates and also people within the system, because we have to shift it together and it's not going to happen overnight. Protests are important, contention and variety of perspectives are super important. And yet we need a collective plan that centers our kids that can really get us to a better place of measuring, setting goals on holistic student achievement, and then being held responsible for that as individual, elected officials, superintendents, folks, quote unquote, at the top, and feel like a team working together towards that, because we have so much, it's come up, right? Capitalistic, individualistic, like that's not the history and the culture of our kids and our communities. So we need to work together, in my mind, to think about how do we get to that place and then map it out over time. And I hear the urgency, and I also want to think about like, how do we honor that urgency, but also consider a little bit of realism, just given all of the current power dynamics and all of the challenges that our communities are facing. But I know others are wanting to jump in.
Can I add, Rahh?
Go ahead.
I think there is no teacher here. Maybe there are a few, but teachers know where their students are, whether their students can read, whether their students can't. Like an assessment necessarily might not give them like, oh, I didn't know that you couldn't read. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. I'm so surprised. You know, if that's the case, there's like a huge problem in whatever's happening in that classroom, right? So then if that's the case, then we look at assessments on what they're being used at the higher level. And I think it's been very connected to the lack of trust in the profession and the teaching profession, that people know what they're doing, to hold into account, often to take away resources or give resources in either way. And so it's kind of like, do we need that system? When I wrote my dissertation, I wanted to really look at schools in high need communities and their teams. What do they prioritize? And how does the data of what they do at their school, they have high functioning teams, but their data is like lagging, like put a context to it. What is happening at the school that your grad rate is what it is, that your testing results are what they are? And once you started unpacking that, it's often things that systems don't want to hear, right? There's issues with contracting and not being able to hire teachers. There's issues with recruitment, teachers not wanting to go to those spaces to work, or not having like the best quality folks wanting to go into those systems. Constant turnover because a kid brought a gun to school and the teacher freaked out and that was their last day. So now they gotta, you know, the toll, the emotional toll. Like when you start unpacking and I think looking and allowing schools to put context to their data, the responsibility shifts to all these other stakeholders in ways that people don't wanna have to shift that. Because when I would ask directors, here's what the school said that they really need. Oh, well, we can't really do that. So what we're gonna do is provide more training on Common Core, because that other issue, we can't really solve it. But that's the issue that's really impacting what is happening at the site. And the other thing I wanted to find out from teachers is like, what do you actually do well? And what do you love in these spaces, in your community work? Everything that teachers were passionate about directly connected to issues students were facing in their community. So all the important programs like artwork and, you know, whatever it was, you know, science, technology, farming, some had developed farms because there's food insecurity in the community. Teachers were 100% all in. None of that is measurable, right? And so it gets completely devalued because there's not a measure to say, well, yeah, but your grad rate's still low. But we're not gonna look at the context of why your grad rate's low. Even though you're doing this amazing work, we're gonna discount all of this amazing work and energy because the whole system is based on things that aren't valued by the members in that space. And so I think there has to be a huge shift in how we look at communities and how we measure the success of communities based on what they value in that space, and all that work that wraps around that. And I did want to talk about like programs like dual enrollment and our role in that, because we started off with 5 college courses this semester. About half of our students dropped out. And that's why I think connecting it to these larger systems are really important to always do. Is our students dropped out because they have unstable internet, no fault of their own. The Chromebooks are not strong enough or powerful enough to do everything they're supposed to do when they're online. And even the systems that the community colleges use and we use in our district are completely disconnected. So kids have to learn how to navigate 2 completely different systems. And that alone turned off a bunch of my students. Like I could never access the college system from my courses. I was completely lost. So our work goes from the really small technical and how quickly we can fix that to this like large aspect of these huge, large systems that need to be shifted.
Hey, Brother Rahh, I wanted to add one little point. Just one little point. Standardized tests, a discussion worth having, but the other discussion that's even greater contextually is the expectation gap. And because of the expectation gap, many believe, because they teach this and tell this to our children, that gap allows for there to be a ceiling and our children will not achieve. So we could attack everything other than what we ought to be attacking, which is direct teaching and learning, which happens each and every day. And there's a significant problem in American schools because children are not learning and we are in charge of that.
Yeah, Principal Cafele talks a lot about the attitude gap, and I think that's important. Go ahead, Victor. We got 5 more minutes. I want to tap in Sticks too. Go ahead, Victor.
So I think it's wild, but I'm grateful that it took an actual global pandemic for institutions like the Cal State system and the UC system to like really be like, yo, maybe SATs or ACTs, they aren't it, right? Because how they disproportionately impact students of color, right? And I just think it's all backwards. And you even just look at these test prep programs, right? They're not building students' knowledge so that they can do well on the test. They're showing them how to take these tests, and who does well on these tests, or who has access, to these test prep programs? People with money, people from more affluent communities. And I look back at to like what's happening in the classroom, obviously being a teacher. We are, for good reason, I bet, content experts, where we're so excited about our content that we're not preparing students to think critically and to learn, but just to like memorize all this information that's in our specific fields. And it's always been my belief that the purpose of education was to facilitate learning so that students are critical thinkers, problem solvers, and to develop their literacy skills. So once they process all this information, they can communicate it in an effective way, right? However, when we're just content experts and we fell in love with our content and just pushing it onto kids, like that information is really just useless, right? So these different subjects should be just different vessels in which students are developing those skills. So I know my methods are a little bit unorthodox. People probably asking like, yo, why is Mr. Lee always like taking kids on field trips or taking the knucklehead out for lunch? And it's really building that relationship with them so they can see the bigger picture. Yeah, we see it. Students don't. Again, like Mr. Garrett said, they're in survival mode, right? They can't really see it when they're in survival mode. So how do we get them to really invest in their own learning and not just the specific content? And I think that's part of the deliberation process.
Yeah. So listen, I got two more questions I want to tap in. Last, I want to tap in Sticks, you're here. I want to talk about community. When we're talking about equity, we're talking about tests, we're talking about all these different things. What is the role of relationship or the relationship to community? Because all this impacts the community, right? Like I said all the time, that kid that gets the 4.0 but continues the cycle of oppression means nothing for the community. So you're getting them to college, but they continue the cycle of oppression. They continue to oppress their community. What does that do for the community in which we live in, for the community in which we serve? And what does that, I always believe that community-centered problems needs to center the community for solutions. So Sticks, talk about your role and what that means for community, not just in Watts, but nationally.
Right. Well, first things first, every institution, organization, or corporation should have public-private partnerships. You should always have someone on the outside who has a voice, a footprint, or boots on the ground inside the community to help identify the issues that are plaguing the people in the community. The inside, quote unquote, would be the educational institutions. The outside would be potentially the nonprofit organizations or individuals who have experience with problem solving or critical thinking when it comes to community issues. And when you bring those two together, you can make insurmountable change in regards to creating solutions for what is needed within these institutions. Just really quick, obviously we have a very interesting and unorthodox relationship when it comes to public-private partnership with Think Watts and Principal Rahh, everything that's happening. The reason why is not because we just want to be, we're good people, but we want to see change within the community. So first, what we have to identify is use data. What people often intend to do is use data to try to control or say this is the problem, but you have to use data to understand what's happening in order to identify the problem. And numbers can easily be manipulated. However, you have to use those numbers and focus on all of the points that are needed to adjust, like standardized testing. Like obviously we can look at the numbers and say, oh, these students this is what's happening to these students. However, but we're not focusing on The real issue is, what is the test focusing on? Why is it a consistent number of individuals in these neighborhoods that continue to not excel in these standardized testing? It can't just be that everyone in these communities are incompetent or aren't able to articulate themselves on it. It has to be something deeper and rooted deeper in that. Now we got to start asking the questions behind that data. Okay, well, where do these tests come from? Where was this test invented? Who did it serve? Who is it focused on? Maybe it doesn't focus on our communities that are in these low-income communities. Maybe it's specifically created for individuals that don't look like us. And we have to start digging deeper into data in order to identify. There's information out there that shows that standardized testing was created for draft, like military or war. I wish I could articulate it a little better, but we can all look this up and see it. And then we have tests that only focus on two areas: language arts and forgive me for blanking because I'm talking in a rapid speed, and math, but it focuses on nothing else in regards to life skills. It doesn't focus on the arts, doesn't focus on a multitude of other areas that we actually need to use in the real world. The questions are very ambiguous and not kind of straight to the point in regards to real life skills. But not only that, it's pushed by major corporations to get high standardized test scores to rate not only students but teachers. Not only that, and I'll let you go to the next thing. It's interesting to me how they avoid the data that shows trauma. Mental trauma affects the ability to achieve high test scores. This is real data that's out. And we all know, sitting at this panel, sitting right here, that individuals that live in areas like Watts, pockets of Compton, pockets of Long Beach, Linwood, East Los, whatever we can bring up, city after city or neighborhood after neighborhood, experience high levels of trauma due to a multitude of factors. Parents on drugs, they taking care of their brother and sister all night because mom and dad got to work, or mom and dad not even in their life, they living with granny, or they not living with nobody, they sleeping in a car, but then have to come to school the next day to take a standardized test without any real mental preparation, any type of breathing, yoga, the woosah stuff out of there, with nothing. You got to come to school after JJ just got killed and that's your brother, and you live in the projects, and you got to come to school the next day and take a test. How do we expect our kids in these communities to excel beyond this quote unquote level or this ceiling of success that they're measuring for us? Even though it doesn't mean you're not going to be a successful human being in endeavors like entrepreneurship, financial literacy, etc. They're only measuring how good of a person you are when you're in these walls with language arts and math. But that's why it takes.
Jump in.
Listen. He just dropped it. And I go sit there, make it quick. But I want to.
Yeah, quick. Number one is even connected to that the tests aren't supposed to allow all the students to be successful. So if too many students are doing good in a test, they change the test. Like the way the tests are structured is a certain percentage have to not do well. And if you get those numbers up, then we got to rewrite the test to ensure that there's like a percentage that don't perform, which is crazy. And also connected to that, graduation rates in the state of California, just for the audience, it is impossible for some schools to have 100% graduation rate. So when we tout that that's the goal, if you have an autism program, those kids don't receive a regular graduation certificate, they count as dropouts. If you have kids in special education who can legally stay for a fifth year, or newcomers to the country who can legally stay for a fifth year, they all count as dropouts as soon as their 4 years are up. So there are schools, and where are those kids? In our communities. Where are those kids in our communities? What's the values of property and all of that connected to? Data that guarantees that it's impossible for some schools to meet the goals and metrics that the system has set. And that could be changed.
The only thing that the test score is access. And we got to be clear about that.
It blocks
They
it.
test access. They test access to resources. They test access to opportunity. They test access to whether or not you are a legacy of education, right? That's what they're testing. Just as Brother Victor said, right? Those people who can afford test prep, those are the ones that score well. I always body standardized tests, but that's also because my parents were college graduates, right? There's a legacy of education that I was able to benefit from that allowed me to be sharper at the game than a lot of people. Hell, when I took my teacher exams, I think I got 3 missed questions out of 400. That is being a person who has privilege and the ability to tap in on some resources that some of my counterparts in my neighborhood never had the opportunity to. So we got to understand, like, when we keep propping up these things, and then when we want to talk about teacher accountability in these schools, I'm sorry, Rod, but I do got to say this one thing. I'm very sorry.
Last one, Shivy.
Those scores tap in directly with our CCRPI. That CCRPI score is what people use to determine whether or not they're going to move into a neighborhood. And what happens is, if you got high CCRPI scores, those people who have money, those people who can choose where they want to live, they're going to move into that neighborhood and they're going to concentrate brain power and legacy of education. And what that ends up doing is concentrating what schools are winning and what schools are losing. Now, when those scores are low, you now create opportunity districts and opportunity schools, which now can be taken over by states, which is why places like New Orleans have 100% charter schools. They have 100% for-profit takeover of the systems. Systems like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, have created policies which made all of these things true. And it is all an effort of people like Betsy DeVos, United States Department of Education Secretary, to be able to take over our public schools everywhere. And when you are propping up these standardized tests, and we are not taking a stand on it like we are with Teachers for Good Trouble, we do not have to wait. We can shut down schools. We can say no. We can put a stop to it and not wait for these politicians to do the right thing. We can become the politicians, run for office, stop waiting for these people who are corrupt to make the right choices for us. I'm gonna shut up now. But the point is, we ain't gotta wait.
Listen, y'all. Listen,
man, he ain't got him revved up, man.
Listen here.
Hey, man. Hey, man, you got 3 wrong. I got 3 right, my brother. So.
Hey, listen here. This is, man, I'm telling you, an hour of talk and discussion and dialogue around powerful conversations, because it's not just a standardized test. I heard about trauma. Sticks talked about trauma. A lot of schools across the nation may say that they understand trauma, may even recognize it by doing a PD, but then they fail to respond to it, right? And I just want to thank everyone for being here. For those who have been here, I just want to do a quick round robin for this last question. This is just yes or no from everybody. And you just say yes or no. Currently, right now, I think it may be anonymous, right? Do we have a system that helps us connect and act on inequities across all domains in America? Do we have a system that helps us connect and act on inequities across all domains in America? Victor, yes or no? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Dang, rookie move. No.
Mr. Garrett.
No.
Makai.
No.
Sticks.
Of course, man. No, I'm just playing. No.
Claudine.
Absolutely not.
Dr. Gonzalez.
I have to say hell to the no.
Shivy.
We do, and it's us. We are the system.
Tanya.
I was gonna say not yet, but we're gonna be working on it, right?
Absolutely. So I really want to thank everyone who has attended. Thank you for coming to our Access and Equity Breaking Through the Standard. I want to give everyone an opportunity, if they are not tapped in to what you guys are doing, how can they find you? How can they tap in? We'll start with you, Tanya. For those across the nation, we got New Jersey, Florida. What can they do to tap in with you? Where can they find you?
I'm going to put it in the chat, social media, email, all that information.
All right. So if everyone put their information in the chat, listen, I want you all to have one lasting message for our educators, parents who are on this. What is your lasting message to those who have attended, and lasting message all across America? Tanya, what is your message? What do you want to leave people with?
I was trying to multitask, typing and thinking at the same time. I mean, my message is thank you for being here. Thank you for being in the work, and let's keep collectively acting so that our kids get what they absolutely deserve from us. Thank you for your future leadership and your continued focus on those who need us most.
Shivy, go ahead.
Teachers, we can do all things. We don't have to wait for anybody else to save us. We are exactly who we need right now. On December 15th, we're asking for a national teacher sick out to put a stop to standardized testing immediately. Right here in Atlanta, they're trying to push us right back in the building in the midst of COVID, in the height of it all, just to do standardized testing. We have an absolute emergency to put a stop to it. And I ask everybody to stand with us throughout the nation and the world so that we can show people that teachers are here to be the change that we've always been waiting for. Let's go save our babies.
Dr. Gonzalez.
Sorry. I would just say do what you can, whether it's local, whether it's in your school, whether you have the connections and resources to go out of your school and your space. Be vocal, bring attention to it in any way that you can. Highlight the great work that you're doing as much as possible. If you're at a school site and you have a chess club, highlight the heck out of that chess club in the community as much as possible. Highlight the good, the counter narratives, the counter stories, and just keep pushing.
Makai.
I would just simply say drive change and deliver results wherever you are within the system.
Nice. Claudine.
We are the change we've been waiting for. Join Teachers for Good Trouble.
Mr. Garrett. Jeffrey.
Yeah, I would say I just put this in the chat. I host a show where you can see people like Principal Rahh and Tanya. It's called All the Above. The link is in the chat if you'd like to hear more similar conversations to this. And in terms of today's topic, I would say I think what we are realizing is that a lot of the issues in education are much larger than education. And when we're talking about healthcare, when we're talking about housing, when we're talking about homelessness, when we're talking about all of these things, the drama around inequity in education is the result of these interconnected systems. And so we have to think more holistically and act and expect more holistic solutions from our representatives.
Nice. Victor.
Yeah, I guess the message I want to leave you guys with is mentorship matters. Non-academic mentorship matters. So whether you're in that teacher, student capacity, or administrator, or policymaker, like to set up, put systems in place where that intentional mentorship could take place for these students. Yeah.
Sticks.
Last but not least, for my late ass, I want everybody to really, really, really think about something called macroeconomics. Macroeconomics, and I want everyone to follow the transactions. We have a system in place where this whole system is ran by the force of macroeconomics in regards to financial multinational systems. The Goldman Sachs, the Morgan Stanleys, the JP Morgan and Chases, the Fed, who funds all of those, who then have rules, policies, and regulations that focus on infusing capital into specific other corporations, institutions that actually take the lead before education. And then within those, that powers how those educational system works. Our communities, people that look like us, do not operate at the highest level of macroeconomics. So until we can address the financial disparities within our community, and when I say community, I mean in the entire culture, we will continue to have these educational battles, these systemic educational battles until we address macroeconomics. So everyone, please look into that, understand what that is, and understand how that is directly connected to why things are the way they are within all these educational systems.
Facts, facts. And I'll leave you with this. Thank you guys for all attending. Change the world. Don't let the world change you. All right? Our kids need you, our teachers need you, and our community needs you. All right? If no one told you that they love you today, y'all know I love you. I'm gonna ask for my panelists if you can stay on for a little bit longer as everyone leave, so we can just wrap up. But thank you guys for all attending our first revolutionary education about access and equity, breaking through the standard. We appreciate you for being here. Y'all have a great day, you guys. All right. Let me get them all out and boom, 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 boom. Yeah, we did that, you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Let me stop recording real quick.